Thompson-Nicola Regional Library to offer this series of author talks. And I'd like to thank the library for continuing to offer these even in COVID, which has had its challenges. And I'd especially like to thank Catherine Schmidt and Kelly from the library. And before we get into the nuts and bolts of tonight, I'd like to acknowledge that the hosts this evening, me and Kelly, our technological facilitator, are gathered on the traditional and unceded territory of the Secwepemc people. And it's a real honor to live, work, and play here. And it's an honor to have someone from Ontario who is from another territory with us tonight. As far as our format goes, we'll have a short author reading and then we'll launch into whatever Terry would like to talk about. I have some questions prepared, but if anybody has questions, please type them in and we'll try to get to them all. So I'd like to warmly welcome our author for tonight, Terry Emmett Grogan. I'm taking the liberty of adding that in there. Okay. Thank you so much for joining us. And in introduction, I'd like to tell everyone a little bit about 12 Stories, which is the novel that you're here tonight to talk about. 12 Stories is a novel about Northwestern Ontario, the full arc of a quiet, desperate life told in 15 chapters, episodes in the life of a lifelong con artist. Author Terry Fallis, two-time winner of the Stephen Leacock Medal for Humor, praised this novel by saying, Emmett Grogan writes about the gritty underside of small-town life with such realism that it feels like memoir, not fiction. He knows how to write dark and beautiful sentences and skillfully deploys humor to soften the often harsh edges of his characters' lives. Balancing the light and the dark so well is no easy achievement. With 12 Stories, Grogan is a storyteller to watch, which, as an endorsement of the novel, is about as good as it gets for a literary humorist in Canada. Tonight, Terry will be reading the second chapter of 12 Stories, or not the second chapter, it's a different chapter, called Please Play Again. And with that, I will, with great pleasure, turn it over to Terry.
Well, thank you. So my name is Terry Grogan, but I publish under the name Emmett Grogan because I work in a bookstore in downtown Toronto, and I enjoy having the freedom to sell my novel to people who don't know I'm the author. I find that you get a much more honest reaction from your readers when they don't know who they're talking to. This is the novel. This is the novel here, and I'm not sure if that is a mirror image or the correct. But anyways, so I was going to read the second chapter of the novel. It's called The Widow Leibowitz, but I decided it's kind of a dark story, so I would like to read something that is a little more uplifting. I want to read a story that is about my father. My father's birthday is in 2 weeks. He's going to be 75 years old. And this is not the second chapter of the novel. This is actually the last chapter of the novel. And it's kind of like the encore story, the story that when you want to end on a high note, you try to do the best that you can so that, you know, people take away a good feeling from the collection. So the story is called Please Play Again. And it starts off a little dark, but I promise you that it has a good ending. Anybody who hasn't seen the book, all of the stories that I've written that make up the collection are posted on my website, emmettgrogan.com. The last two stories that hadn't been posted to the website, I posted them just this morning. And then this afternoon, I chose, well, I should probably read the last story, which is called Please Play Again. So here's the story. My dad finds the cat while searching for beer bottles behind the recreation center. It's been there a while, frozen in a snowbank, well preserved by the winter. With no collar, it isn't a household cat, it's a bush cat. It's so young it probably lost its mother to a predator, then wandered off looking for help in the tall grass. My dad goes to his truck, gets his shovel, finds a cardboard box and an old towel to wrap up the cat. In a patch of sun, the ground is soft enough to bury the kitten. He covers the box with dirt, patting down the soil with his shovel, piles some stones on the grave to prevent scavengers from getting at the body. Then he mumbles a brief prayer for the soul of the cat. When the kitten is properly laid to rest, my father packs up his shovel and drives to Tim Hortons for lunch. At Tim Hortons, it's the first day of the roll up the rim to win. The red cups are back. My dad orders 2 extra large coffees, double with milk. He likes to go through the drive-through window, especially on weekends, so he doesn't have to stand in line with the rest of the local yahoos. They all know him at the window in Hepworth, Ontario. First cup, my dad rolls up the rim, wins a free coffee. That's all right, he thinks. Second cup, he rolls up the rim, wins another free coffee. As he rips off the tags from his cups, he thinks, I got a little streak going here. Then he tucks the tags from his coffee cups into his breast pocket for safekeeping, thinking of the cat from that morning. It was tough not to cry burying the kitten. My dad's a big softy in that hidden way, emotionally guarded, yet tearful at moments you'd never expect. He knows he did the right thing that morning in the forest behind the arena. The next day, my dad cashes in both of his rims at Tim Hortons. He feels like a bit of a mooch taking home 2 free coffees and not ordering anything to pay for, but he's meeting this guy named Fabian for lunch. Fabian's this dude I hear about all the time. They go hunting and fishing together. They play pool and they play poker. They shoot pool twice a week. Fabian this, Fabian that. They drive up to northwestern Ontario each May to go fishing for 2 weeks on Big Sky Island. I've never been invited along. It turns out Fabian is the same age as my dad, even though Fabian still works part-time for the LCBO. My father has been retired from the Ontario Provincial Police for almost 15 years. I always assumed Fabian was like the son my father never had, but then Fabian had a heart attack and I found out my dad's best friend is 25 years older than me. Nobody's making Fabian carry a canoe anymore north of Lake Superior. I envy the time they get to spend together. I don't have any friends from high school that I'm still in contact with. At lunch, my dad gives one of his coffees to Fabian, keeping the other for himself. When they roll up their rims, my dad wins another free coffee, but Fabian's cup is a bust. In his excitement, my dad drives back to Tim Hortons, gets 2 more cups of coffee. My dad likes to reheat his coffee in the microwave after dinner. That saves him returning to Hepworth before heading out the door to shoot pool on Wednesdays and Saturdays. Later that night, while watching television, he rolls up the rim on both cups. They're both winners. So my father has 2 more free cups of coffee waiting for him the next morning at Tim Hortons. The plan is to meet Fabian for breakfast, then go out searching for beer bottles along the highway. They have a route they work together, bombing down side roads at 110 kilometers an hour. It's like a newspaper route, except my dad collects empty beer bottles. He can spot a beer bottle in the ditch from 100 yards, and he knows where the farmers drop their empties in the field on a regular basis. Give him 20 minutes and he can put together a case of empties for you any day of the week. Fabian's just there to jump out of the truck. At breakfast, my dad gives one of his coffees to Fabian, keeping the other for himself. He rolls up his rim, wins another free coffee. That's 6 in a row. Just before Fabian rolls up his own rim, he thinks better of it, hands the cup to my father instead. My dad rolls up the rim for Fabian. It's another free coffee. My dad has the magic touch, like being able to drop a nickel into a slot machine just the right way. After 7 winning rims, even the staff at Tim Hortons takes notice. He's the man with the golden thumb, the King Midas of coffee cups. My dad and Fabian grab 2 more coffees on their way out the door. Later that night, in the drive-through lane at Tim Hortons, all thumbs at his crotch, my dad rolls up another winner. The woman at the pickup window tells my father, everybody's talking about this hot streak you're on, Bob. You've got to be the luckiest son of a bitch in town. She figures he's going to win the Camry, but after 8 rims in a row, he's not so sure. It's kind of embarrassing when he throws up for lunch the next afternoon, presenting his 9th winning rim. He orders a soup and sandwich combo, setting his free cup of coffee over on the next table. To be honest, it makes him slightly uncomfortable to look at, so he stretches out a newspaper while eating his lunch. The restaurant is packed, but nobody says anything to my dad. He gets a sense that he's being watched. What will happen next? Finishing his coffee, he rolls up the rim and then finds another winning cup in his hand. He tries to act casual about it, but the people around him start clapping. As he cashes in his 10th winning rim, the girl at the counter touches the side of her nose with the pad of her thumb. It reminds my dad of the way old men from the old country blow their noses out on the street. But the girl at Tim Hortons is too sophisticated for that. She's just smiling at his good fortune, sharing a glance with my dad. My dad still gets looked at rather than looked through, which is more than I can say for most men his age, let alone my own age. But then he's always been a bit of a flirt. Everybody loves a confident man, and my dad is nothing if not comfortable in his own skin, even while mucking around out in the bush. For the next month, until the end of March, my dad rolls up at least half a dozen winning rims each day. He drinks coffee for breakfast, lunch, dinner, and usually after dinner as well. But people start coming up to him on the street, asking him to roll up the rims of their cups. He's a minor celebrity around Sauble Beach, thanks to Tim Hortons. My dad regularly stumbles across the unexpected while collecting bottles. More than once, he's dragged home a set of golf clubs, a pair of pants, figure skates, a kite, or snowshoes. But during the roll up the rim to win promotion, everywhere he turns, my dad finds unrolled cups waiting to be revealed as winning rims. He finds unrolled cups in the parking lot of Tim Hortons, in the ditch behind the arena, in the trash can outside the post office, on the street in front of the drugstore. He finds unrolled cups washed ashore down at the lake, while searching for beer bottles in the forest behind the post office in Hepworth, even while scouting for turkeys along the muddy concession side roads that thread Upper Bruce County from Hepworth, Ontario, all the way north to Tobermory on the tip of Bruce Peninsula. My dad rolls up so many cups, his thumbnail goes red, and every single one is a winner. The words win, gagner un café, coffee, come to leave him cold. He wins so many free cups of coffee, he starts throwing rims in the garbage. Even with Fabian at his side, the two of them can only drink so much coffee in a day. If my dad handed out winning rims while in the lineup at Tim Hortons, they'd probably ban him from the restaurant for the duration of the contest, and rightfully so. After his 200th winning rim, the owner of the Hepworth's franchise comes over and asks my father if they can speak privately. The franchise owner gestures towards a small office at the back of the restaurant, discreetly leading my dad away from the menu counter. At first, my dad thinks the guy might be trying to pick him up, making small talk in the back office about the restaurant business. Then my father realizes the franchise owner wants to talk with him about him winning his 200th free cup of coffee in the last month. Would my father mind having his picture taken for the local newspaper? 2 women from corporate headquarters have been staying at the Golden Eagle cottages in Sable Beach, hoping to meet him. They want him to do his trick with the coffee cup, rolling up a winner every time. My dad isn't too thrilled about having his photo taken, but he figures, what the hell? When's the last time anybody asked him to be in the newspaper? 2 young ladies walk into the office and introduce themselves. Paulette and Pauline, twin sisters. They both work for the marketing department at Tim Hortons. My dad immediately thinks IVF babies. The sisters are friendly enough, but after shaking hands all around, my dad asks, am I in some kind of trouble? Which causes both of the sisters to burst out laughing. Oh God, no, they tell him. You're famous down in Oakville. We call you Quantum Bob. Quantum Bob? Paulette asked my father, have you ever heard of Schrodinger's cat? My dad shakes his head. Paulette and Pauline take turns explaining. Schrodinger's cat is a famous thought experiment where a cat sits in a box along with a vial of poison. The vial of poison is connected to a particle of radioactive subatomic matter. If the radioactive subatomic matter decays, the vial of poison is cracked open, killing the cat. But since you can't know if the radioactive subatomic matter has decayed without opening the box to observe the situation, until you open the box, the cat is both dead and alive simultaneously, because the vial of poison could be either cracked open or still intact. The outcome of the experiment ultimately depends on the observer, and that is a paradox, in that there is no single outcome of the experiment unless it is observed. How can the cat be both dead and alive, my father asks. Either the particle of matter is decayed or else it isn't. That's just common sense, like in nature, the birds and the bees. At the subatomic level, physics works differently, Pauline tells him. Quantum indeterminacy, Paulette reassures him. What they call a superposition of states, Pauline explains quantum mechanics to my dad. Until the observer himself causes the situation to collapse from multiple simultaneous states into a single set state, subatomic particles have the characteristics of all possible states. My father takes off his baseball cap, scratches his head for a bit. His brain feels itchy. Pauline unlocks a briefcase, removes a sleeve of red cups. She hands the red cups to her sister, who hands them to the franchise owner, who inspects them for a moment, eyeing them like an audience member called to the stage by a traveling magician, before handing the cups to my father and waiting for the sisters to continue with their presentation. That's 48 roll up the rim to win cups, still in the packaging. You have a 1 in 6 chance of rolling up a winner, Paulette explains. So you should be able to pull 8 winning rims out of that stack, and one of those will likely be a donut, not even a coffee. Until you roll up the rim, each cup is either a winner or not a winner. We have a theory that you exist in some sort of quantum bubble, Bob, where every single cup is a winner because you are the observer. I could roll up the same sleeve of cups and walk away with 7 cups of coffee and a free donut. Let's see what happens when you do it, Pauline challenges him. My dad rolls up the first cup. It's a winner, free coffee. My dad rolls up the second cup. It's a winner, free coffee. My dad rolls up the third cup. It's a winner, free coffee. My dad rolls up all 48 cups. Each and every one is a winner, free coffees, no donuts. He doesn't even bother to rip the tags from the cups. He just hands the cups back to the franchise owner, who hands them to Paulette, who hands them to Pauline for verification of the phenomena. Rolling up 48 winning rims in a row, but no free donuts, just coffee. That's the most incredible thing I have ever witnessed, Pauline tells my dad. Like watching the hand of God rig a game of dice, Paulette concurs. Einstein would have had a nervous breakdown meeting you. By 1926, he was already spooked by some of the deeper implications of quantum mechanics. You would have scared the pants off him. Out in the parking lot, my dad thinks I exist in a quantum bubble. Well, Fabian will get a laugh out of that next time we sit down to play cards. Fat lot of good it's done me otherwise. As he tucks Paulette and Pauline's business card into the breast pocket of his jacket for safekeeping, my dad suddenly remembers the cat he buried at the start of the month on the first day of the Roll Up the Rim to Win promotion. The cat in the box in the forest behind the arena. Sitting in his truck, hand on his heart, he immediately knows what he has to do. He drives over to the recreation center, gets his shovel out of the back of his truck. He removes the stones marking the cat's grave, digs up the cardboard box he buried a month earlier. Opening the cardboard box, unwrapping the towel, he discovers the kitten gazing at him with a stunned look on its face, waiting to be rescued. The cat is weak, but alive. Literally 5 ounces of black and white fluff resting in the palm of my father's hand. Anybody else would call you lucky, my dad tells the kitten, but you look like a real little rascal to me, and so that's what I'm going to call you. Rascal P. Coltrane, the cat who came back. Then my dad stuffs the kitten in the pocket of his jeans, the front pocket of his jeans, and smuggles Rascal home. And that's my story.
That is fabulous, Terry.
So thank you. I should have said this at the start. Thank you to everybody who signed in for this event, and thank you for the library for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to read one of my stories.
Well, we're so happy to have you join us. One of the things I wanted to ask you about tonight is, how do you find permission to write? I think a lot of people struggle with that. Do you give it to yourself, or?
I was going to read the story of the widow Leibowitz because it was the most difficult story for me to write. And even though it's the second story of my novel, the second chapter of my novel, it was like the last thing I wrote. And part of it, how I managed to figure out how to write the story was you just read a lot. You read a lot of different authors, you get a lot of different influences. And in particular, The Widow Leibowitz is a story about an accident that happens at Halloween. There's a snowmobile that goes to the ice, and there's a guy in high school who drowns. And the story is a very personal story, and the story is set in the town of Nipigon, where I grew up. And I think if some people read it, they would probably read too much into it, and they wouldn't be happy with how the town is portrayed in the story. So anybody who doesn't have the book, you can read the story. It's a 10-minute story on emmettgrogan.com. And when I read Alice Munro, she early in her career caught a lot of pushback from people in the town that she lived in, Wingham, Ontario. And there was a specific story that she wrote that was pretty closely based on things that happened in the town that she was from. And the story was published in 1968 in her first collection, Dance of the Happy Shades, about something that happened in her town in the 1920s, early 1930s. And I thought, Alice Munro at some point had to decide, do I want to tell this story, even though it will probably upset some people, get some noses out of joint. Some of the people in the community won't be too happy with me. And she had to wrestle with, I'm trying to create something here that is art. And, she didn't need to include the story in her first collection, because her first collection had 12 stories. It could have had 11 stories. But she obviously made the decision that I want to tell this story. And when I realized that she had done this in 1968, I thought, if it was good enough for her to to take on a story that she knew would probably rub some people the wrong way, that gives me permission to write a story that some people in my hometown might look at and say, well, you know, it's not really a great picture of the people here. I didn't read that story because it's a dark story about a death in a small town, and how there's an accident on the ice when a guy goes to the snowmobile and drowns at Halloween. It's Halloween in Northern Ontario, so there's ice out, there's ice on the lake, which is a very Canadian story. But I decided I wanted to read Please Play Again. And anybody who's really interested, they could look at The Widow Leibowitz. There's other authors that I read that, I couldn't figure out how to tell the story, but I read something by Margaret Atwood that helped me a lot. The other author I wanted to talk about was Mordecai Rickler. And I read him, and what I really learned from him is, if you're writing Canadian literature and you're Canadian, you should write about where you're from. And I think that, I give a lot of credit to Mordecai Rickler that he represented a time and a place that if he hadn't represented it, it would be gone now.
Right.
So when I wrote my thing and it's set in Northwestern Ontario, there may not be a lot of novels written about Northwestern Ontario, but I wanted to do the best I could to put something out there that would last for as long as I can make it last. So yeah, I finding permission is, you read a lot of authors and you realize that everybody has had the same, questions about what work they're doing and how they should do it and why they should do it. And you just kind of follow in the footsteps of the influences, be influenced and follow in the footsteps that people who came before you.
Right.
My next answer won't be so rambling.
Oh, no. Everyone's here to listen to you, not to listen to me. So I'll just sort of throw out questions and you can take your time answering them. I find it really interesting. I took a writing course not long ago with someone who said people write about New York City and London all the time, but no one writes about where they're from. Yeah. To other people, that's exotic. So you should write about where you're from. So yeah. I'm really pleased to hear that.
It always kind of bugs me. Like, I'm a bookseller in Toronto, right? It always kind of bugs me when I read Canadian literature and you get a novel by a Canadian literary author and it's set in ancient Greece or it's set in Bosnia. And it's like, if you're going to claim, Canadian literature, why don't you write about, Canada? It's almost like there's not any faith that there's any audience for our stories, or that there's nothing interesting happening in Canada, so we have to write about something exotic. I have more respect for an author who writes a novel set in Newfoundland about some disaster that happened at sea, because you're learning about Newfoundland and it's the people in Newfoundland, and it's a Newfoundland author telling a story about Newfoundland, putting it on the record. I'm always a little skeptical when it's a story by a Canadian author that is, doesn't represent Canada. It's a story set in Chicago. Chicago people should write their Chicago stories.
Absolutely. We've got a comment from Valerie wondering if you've read Grant Lawrence's Adventures in Solitude, which is a memoir from where he is as well, a West Coaster. I loved it because of the humor, and I just know I will love yours as well because of the humor. I laughed out loud as you read.
Hey, thank you. I know a lot of authors because I've been a bookseller for 25 years, but I can't say I'm familiar with that author. I'm going to write it down and look it up. I'm always looking for new influences, but no, I can't say that I'm familiar with that author.
We have another question from Mary. What are you working on now?
Well, so I'm in a unique position, that being a bookseller, that I cut out the middleman and I did the book myself. And I've had a lot of success with the book. And one of the things is that every 6 months I can go back to press and do a new printing of my book. And I have the freedom to experiment and change things up. So believe it or not, at Christmas time, I wrote a story that I decided the next time I go back to press with the novel, I'm going to cut one of the stories out and replace it with a different story. And I mean, if I was being published traditionally, you don't get to go back and change things and tinker with what you've done. So there's that, but I also have another collection of stories that I'm working on. I'm tentatively calling it Different Times because 12 stories is, it's called 12 stories, and each story can be read separately, but it's really a novel told in the form of episodes. And it starts with a kid who's 10 years old, and by the end of the novel, he's middle-aged. So I've got the full arc of the life in here. The guy figures out a little too late some of the things that he didn't understand about his own life, when he was a younger man, and some of the things that he got up to, some of the trouble that he got up to, that he didn't understand how much danger was swirling around him as he was doing things. So I'm working on something called Different Times, and it's a story, sort of the same characters, the same world. It's also set in Northwestern Ontario, but I'm limiting myself that everything takes place in 1985, when some of the characters are in high school, and it's kind of 1 year in the life of these guys, the trouble that they get up to as young men, rather than 10 years old, 14 years old, 17 years old, 20 years old. So you got to keep working on something. I'm fortunate that I can work backwards and play around with this, but I've got other work that I'm doing that I would like to submit to traditional publishing. I know I can make a success of myself by doing it this way, but now I'm going to challenge myself to writing something and submitting it to traditional publishing and seeing what type of result I get. I'm fairly confident that I can have more success doing this myself than I can by submitting it to traditional publishing. When you have the ability to cut out the middleman and sell your own work, one of the things I've learned by doing this myself is nobody in publishing will work as hard to promote you as you can work to promote yourself. So I have that freedom. But now that I've done this and I've had some success with it, I'm going to go try to do it the traditional way with Different Times, and a novel set 1985 when, it's kind of a comedy about it was different times when, nobody rode around in cars with seat belts, and, guys would stand beside their dad in the van, and, there's a cigarette vending machine in the teacher's lounge at the local high school, and everybody would eat peanut butter sandwiches and then have a bowl of shrimp for dessert, in the classroom. Like, it was just a different time. So I'm going to try to find as much comedy as I can in, sort of a retro story.
Oh, it sounds wonderful. And we wish you all the best with that. Traditional publishing can be quite an ordeal, I've heard, but so too can self-publishing. So,
Yeah.
I read an interview of yours where you talked about why you decided to take the self-publishing route. Could you talk a little bit about that and about how you got it underway?
Well, I look at it as, the one thing that I have that no other author really has is I'm a manager of a store that has 3 stores in downtown Toronto. So I've got a pretty good platform to put the book out there and promote the book. And I've been selling the book now for 2.5 years, and we've gone back to press 5 times. And every 6 months, there's the second printing of the novel. There's the 4th printing of the novel. There's the 5th printing of the novel. And I just knew that I could do it to a professional enough level that I could make a good product and then sell it myself. I always thought if you put some work out there and it's good, that other people in publishing will gravitate towards it and will open some doors for you. The surprise is that that's not true. uh, you but the gratifying thing is that, if I went the traditional route of publishing, they would say, well, you can't use a pseudonym. You can't go back to press every 6 months and change the color of the book. You can't change the lineup of the stories on a whim. The book was put in for the Stephen Leacock Medal for Humor. I managed to get the book listed on the Scotiabank Giller Prize website. And I know that if I had a traditional publisher behind me, if I said, hey, why don't we try to do this, make a better product? Why don't we experiment? Why don't we do something different? The answer would be like, we're focused on next season's books. We're not focused on your book and what you've already done. You've already had your shot. So I'm lucky in that, I have complete freedom. And the other thing is the novel, I didn't have to make any compromises when I had it published. And I always figured that this book would be like 100% for 2% of readers. The people who like it are going to really like it because there's nothing else like it. There is no novel set in Northwestern Ontario about a guy who is a bit of a scammer and, the things that he gets up to. The closest thing in Canadian literature I can think of where an anti-hero drove the story was Apprenticeship of Duddy Kravitz. I love The Apprenticeship of Duddy Kravitz. But would that book be published today? Probably not, because it's very specific to a time and a place. And, the main character, Duddy Kravitz, he doesn't come across as, he's an anti-hero, right? He's not a good guy. At the end of the novel, you feel some sympathy for him, but he's not someone that is, they're not going to be making it into a, like a television movie or it's it's literary fiction. And today, all that they want to publish is commercial fiction. So anyways, I had the freedom to do the way this I wanted, and I didn't have to make compromises. And I'm pretty happy with what the result has been.
That's great. We've got a few questions that have popped up in the chat, so I'll look at some of them.
Okay.
Mary has asked, when you write, do you know the beginning and end and then have to fill in the middle?
Well, it depends on what the project is. Sometimes I, outline what's going to happen and I know the structure of all the stories. But sometimes it's just discovering, I don't do a formal outline. The detours that you go off on are sometimes more interesting than what you can plan. Nobody wants to be the person that, writes a 500-page manuscript that you have to cut down to 200 pages. So it is good to have a plan. But I think discovering where I'm going with it while I'm doing it is, part of the challenge and part of the interest. So there's been times where, I start with the last scene and I know how it's going to end. And there's been times where I start with a title and the title is what inspires the story. Sometimes the title inspires the ending of the story. But no, each project is different.
Right. And I would imagine that I've heard other authors say that sometimes characters surprise you or the plot goes somewhere where you weren't expecting it to. So sometimes that's part of the magic as well.
Yeah, there's no way to describe it other than just magic. It's some strange alchemy. Like you can't plan for things that just spontaneously happen. And sometimes the most interesting things it's just instinctual. You just get to a moment on the page where, you know, you couldn't have planned it. It just happens.
Right. Okay, a question from Valerie. When you self-publish, do you hire an editor or do it yourself?
I didn't work with an editor, but what I went and did is I hired the best possible people on earth to produce my book for me. I would be really leery of signing up with a digital publisher, because I see a lot of books that are self-published, and you know, the paper quality isn't that great. It's not that great of a binding. The layout of the pages is not that great. It just doesn't look professional. So I wrote the words, and then I hired a company called Coach House Printing, which does Coach House books, because you know, they design beautiful books, and they use this beautiful paper that will last forever. And you know, rather than having an editor, it was probably more important to have a professional graphic designer lay out the pages of the book and just make it look good. But in terms of an editor, I think sometimes it's got to be very careful when you hire an editor, because they might not be in sync with what you're trying to do with the work. I mean, it's one thing to have the thing proofread so that there's no obvious logical inconsistencies or spelling errors or grammatical errors. But I think it's tricky to find an editor who can bring out the best of the work of what you've got planned, you know, what your vision for the project is. I would say rather than spending money on an editor, more people should spend money on getting the book professionally designed and professionally printed, rather than going the less expensive digital route, which where I see a lot of you know, self-published books or online books, or you know, things that Amazon does, print on demand books. Yeah, you know, just seeing a lot of books in as a bookseller, I tried to put out the most professional product I could. And to give you a good example, when I sent my book in to the lady at the Scotiabank Giller Prize, the response I got was, "You published this yourself?" They, you know, were really surprised at how so, you know, and that made me feel good because, you know, I put out a professional looking product.
Right. How many drafts did you go through before you published for the first time?
Well,
Probably a hard question to answer.
so this collection is 15 short stories. It's called 12 stories because the narrator isn't very reliable. It's actually 15 chapters, and it's a novel told in the form of you know, it's a novel told in the form of short stories that all the stories are connected. And the way I work is most of my stories are 7 pages. I like to write a 2,500 word story. And I don't really write a draft and then go back and revise it and then write another draft. And I pretty much am always editing it and always polishing it up and revising it until you reach the comfort level where this is done, I'm finished with it. You know, of the 15 stories in this novel, most of them are 7 pages. 2 of them are 21 pages, and the heart of the novel is about 42 pages, the big piece. It's a story called The Tallest Man in America. That's a story that I would say, you know, finished, put it aside, went back, did another draft. But most of the things I write are short enough that you don't really do a formal draft. You just play with it, you tinker with it until it's finished. You know, I've never done something where it's a 100-page manuscript that, you know, that would be when you would do a draft, set it aside, then do a second draft. And that's probably when, you know, working with an editor can give you really, you know, strong feedback. But the way I work is most of my things are 7 pages, and they all add up to a novel, but they're all separate. So it's not something that is, I need to revise the second story of the collection because of something that happens later on. It's just, I'm always drafting. I don't do drafts. I'm always revising.
Right. How do you know when it's finished, though? Is it just a sense you get, or you're just done with it?
Well, yeah, I mean, when you're satisfied with the work, you just don't think you can make it any better. But a trick that I have is I have a very firm limit that each of my stories are exactly 7 pages of manuscript. So I don't ever have to worry about it being too long and then cutting it back, or, it's very formal that this story is going to be 7 pages. And, if it ends up being 6.5 pages, I can pad it out to 7. If it's 8, I can usually trim it back to 7, But I believe that, it's good to have like a restriction placed on you that this is going to be a 7-page story, so I got to make it fit into 7 pages. Another trick that I've seen people use is that if something is just kind of getting out of control, if you want to tell a story that starts and ends on the same day, even with, flashbacks and memories and things like that, that's a good way to limit yourself, that your manuscript isn't going to balloon out of control. Because if it starts at 6 o'clock in the morning and it ends at 9 o'clock that night, and everything has to take place that day, if it's one day in the life of Ivan Denisovich, it doesn't have to be, it can't be an 800 or 900 or 1200 page manuscript. It's only going to be 120 pages novella. So, yeah, I try to write things that, have a finite ending, a space that I can work in.
Right. We've got a question about getting a hold of your book. So I know that the library has some copies. So if people are interested in borrowing from the library, the Thompson-Nicola library system has it. You also you also mentioned that they're on your website.
Yeah. If someone gets in touch with me through emmettgrogan.com and, sends me an email, I'd be happy to just drop a copy of the book in the mail, and you can pay me, $10 for the book and the $5 it'll cost for me to mail it out to wherever. I've done that actually for a fair amount of people. People in Winnipeg, people in Edmonton. I had one guy that, he moved to Montreal, and then I sent the book to him. And then the next time I heard from him, he was in London, Ontario, and he wanted another copy for his uncle. So, you don't need to go to Amazon.com. You don't need to go to Chapters or Indigo. You can't go to Chapters or Indigo, and you can't go to Amazon.com to find this book. We sell it in downtown Toronto. But if you send me an email, I'd be happy to send you a copy of the book. It's got a $22 cover price, but I just charge people $10 and $5 for the shipping. I'm just glad that someone is interested enough that they want to read the book.
Oh, that's wonderful. And it's, I noticed that all of your books have different colors for each different edition.
Same book.
Same book, but different colors.
Yeah, you keep
so
it
you
fresh.
Can tell
every 6 months, it's a different color. And it's kind of fun because when I wrote to the Scotiabank Giller Prize people, they have a website, a page on their website called Craving CanLit, where they encourage, Canadian literature, to promote Canadian literature. They'll put your book on the website. So last year, the Craving CanLit 2020 list, if you look up 12 stories, Emmett Grogan, it's got a green cover. Well, now if you look at the 2021 Craving CanLit list, it's got a red cover. It's the same book, but it keeps it fresh. And I wouldn't want anybody to think, well, his book was on the list last year, but because of the pandemic, it's been delayed publication. It's coming out, in 2021. So it was important to me that there's two different covers for the same book on the website. And I'm really proud of the fact that I was managed to make the Scotiabank Giller Prize website, because I'm the first self-published author to make the Scotiabank Giller Prize website. And now I'm the first self-published author to make the Scotiabank Giller website Craving CanLit list 2 years in a row for the same book. But if you look closely, one's got a green cover and the newest edition has a red cover.
Well, congratulations on that. That's, and not the different colors, but to be on the list and to have made it as a self-published author to that is a huge thing.
One of the things I found is when you meet people is the most successful people you will meet are usually the nicest people you will meet. And when I wrote a letter to the lady at the Scotiabank Giller Prize, she got back to me immediately. She was interested in what I was doing. And I was just so surprised that, this is a prize that has obviously a lot of influence on Canadian literature and what gets published in this country and what people read. And the lady behind the website and the lady behind the prize, just the nicest people, really easy to deal with and very friendly and supportive and curious. Terry Fallis is another perfect example of just a super nice guy, approachable. I gave him a copy of my book, and then I waited a bit and I sent him an email. And then 6 months later, when I was doing new printing, I said, you sent me some words of encouragement. Could you contribute a blurb? He wrote back right away. And it's just, these people who are very, very successful are just the nicest people. And I was very fortunate that, I've had some really good experiences, with different people in Canadian literature.
That's wonderful. And I think Canadian literature is a wonderful place to be part of. It's a community, really.
Yeah.
Well, we're drawing near to our closing time. So are there any last words? That sounds terrible, doesn't it? Any last words? Anything you'd like to say in closing?
Well, the one thing I really wanted to say is thank you to having me speak. I really appreciate this opportunity because, I don't have a big publisher behind me, and it's just, I really appreciate the opportunity to be able to read my story. And you can't really understand how much this means to me. The novel, there's an acknowledgments page, and I just wanted to read what I wrote as my acknowledgments in the novel.
Sure.
So the last page of the novel, here's what I wrote. When I was a kid, the public library was more important to me than the arena, the bowling alley, or the town swimming pool. Maybe even more important than the movie theater. And the movie theater was pretty damn important. Where else could you hang out for the entire summer reading Stephen King and watching the complete The Prisoner TV series on one of those old style top-loading VHS players? Where else could you be introduced to both the celebrated cases of Dick Tracy and that elusive copy of The Joy of Sex rumored to be hidden among the stacks on a cold winter morning? So while I tip my hat to John Cheevers, the swimmer in A Two-Car Funeral, which is one of the stories in the novel, and Goodbye Stranger owes its inspiration to Fun with Strangers by Richard Yates, I probably owe more to the public libraries of Northwestern Ontario than I will ever owe to any author on my development as a writer. If, as they say, the golden age of science fiction is 12 years old, I have the public libraries in Northwestern Ontario to thank for teaching me the importance of reading for pleasure as an adult. Thank you, librarians. And libraries are so important. Libraries are the hub of a community. And I'm just so happy that I got the opportunity to speak to the Kamloops Public Library and to your society. So thank you for having me here.
Oh, you're so welcome. And thank you for being with us tonight. It was wonderful to hear your reading and their comments about how wonderful your reading was and how it brought things alive. So I encourage you to read those before you sign out. So thank you, Terry Grogan, writing as Emmett Grogan.
If anybody
And
wants to chat further, just send me an email through emmettgrogan.com and I will respond to any message that I get. I'd be happy to answer any questions, or I'd be happy to talk with anybody who wants to send me an email.
thank you, Terry. And thank you so much for sharing with us. Terry's novel, 12 Stories, it is quite a read. So I encourage you all to check it out on the website, through the library, or email Terry and he'll send you a copy. And it is funny, and it's at turns dark, and it is just so entertaining. And I think it deserves all the praise that it's gotten, for sure, and more besides.
Thank you very much.
So now I'm going to thank everyone for being here and turn it over to Kelly for some final words.
Thank you, Lindsay, and thank you, Terry. Before we go, I want to share with you some other upcoming events we are hosting. Next up in our virtual author series is first-time author Elaine Alex speaking about her book, Calling My Spirit Back, a memoir about growing up as an Indigenous girl in Canada and the impacts of colonization. This book also provides Indigenous knowledge, teachings, and tangible steps on how to cultivate safe spaces for diversity and inclusion. The week of April 6th is National Wildlife Week, and we are celebrating it by offering a ton of events for all ages. Check out all the programs on our website. Thanks again for joining us tonight. And as always, if you have any questions, please reach out to the library at questions@tnrd.ca. Call us at 250-372-5145 or send us a message on Facebook. Thanks very much. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank